It's time to sit back, relax, and listen to Conversations with Joan. Conversations with Joan will inspire, motivate, and empower you. Live your best life now. Listen, learn, think, and decide. And now, here's your host, Joan Herman.
Welcome to Change Your Attitude, Change Your Life's Conversations with Joan. I'm Joan Herman. Thanks for tuning in. Conversations with Joan focuses on topics that are important to your life, from health and wellness to professional development to personal well-being. Change makers join me to share their insights, tips, and strategies so you can thrive and live your best life now. Thank you for taking time for yourself, and thank you for letting us be a part of your life. Now, let's start talking. Sometimes it may feel like the world is becoming more and more divisive. Many people are lonely and they're seeking love and connection. Today's guest, Henry Shukman, provides a way to healing based on the 4 N's of practice: mindfulness, support, absorption, and awakening. He joins us to talk about how we can use our wounds as a pathway to love. Henry teaches mindfulness and awakening practices. His new book is Original Love, The 4 N's on the Path of Awakening. Welcome, Henry. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me. It's a real honor and pleasure.
So, Henry, I want to begin by talking a little bit about your life, because you had some experiences that paved the way for the way that you approach spirituality. So would you tell us a little bit about what you went through when you were younger?
Sure. Thanks for asking. I had a very severe chronic skin condition as a child, starting when I was 6 months old. Eczema is what it actually was, but it was a very kind of severe kind. I was hospitalized quite frequently through my early childhood, and it didn't really get better until my mid-20s. I had the odd period of reprieve, which was very nice, but it always came back. And it was actually starting to meditate at the age of 24 that really, I've tried all kinds of different, conventional and very unconventional healing methodologies by then, and just none of them have worked. But once I started meditating on a daily basis, it really changed my nervous system. It really, from being very kind of fraught and harried and anxious and overwrought in my nervous system, I started to taste what it was like to have a well-regulated nervous system and to find calm and peace and ease and a sense of belonging in this world. And that really changed how my skin sort of felt and how it behaved and how it was. And I started to get better. It was wonderful.
So in addition to the emotional benefits, you were actually experiencing physical benefits.
Correct. And I was in awe of that possibility. And I think, I don't for a minute suggest that meditation will do all kinds of healing, but there's no doubt that, in my mind anyway, that having a better regulated nervous system can be beneficial in many ways, including some amount of physiological healing. I mean, there's research Jon Kabat-Zinn has done over the years. He's really more or less started a new field of research that they call neuropsychoimmunology, which is how the study of how the immune system can get stronger if our psychology is happier, which influences our neurology. And so there's a lot of interesting connectivity between the body and the mind and the heart.
So when you found the peace through meditation and you started to experience these physical benefits, when did you start to make the connection between those deep wounds and love?
Oh, yeah. Thank you for asking that. Well, there's a lot of people these days are interested in meditation, and a lot actually practice it. And the great majority are doing it for the kinds of reasons, broadly speaking, that I was just talking about, which is helping our nervous system, to get better regulated, to get calmer, less stress, less anxiety, more centered and balanced, which is all beautiful. And man, I'm so grateful for that myself. But there's another side to what meditation has to offer, which is usually known as awakening. And awakening is a different deal. It's a moment when, and it can become more than a moment, but usually it's just a moment to begin with, when we suddenly get this hint or hit or glimpse that we're not separate the way we normally think we are, that we're actually part of one great whole that includes all this planet and cosmos. And it sounds wacky, but actually there's significant research now going on into the neuroscience of meditation that is actually affirming this kind of experience, that when we for a moment drop our sense of being who we think we are as an isolated separate entity called me, when that stops or is interrupted just for a moment, we can discover this amazing sense of unity. So when that happens, our hearts just love it. And we're kind of, either at the moment of it or just after, we feel just bathed in a great love. And that experience of this vast unconditional love is proving to be very effective for PTSD, for healing trauma, for healing the wounds that we carry. And to the extent that, we're wounded and we're seeking healing, that kind of seeking is a healthy thing, because truly, healing is available. And, again, there's so much research these days about the extent of trauma in society and of PTSD, and this, and of course there's great work going on in that with many different fantastic researchers and practitioners, but to tap into this unconditional love that's truly always here is just a mind-blowing acceleration of healing, because it, connects us to something so large and all-encompassing.
I think what happens, though, Henry, when we go through trauma and we have these wounds, a lot of times we try to mask the pain and we don't want to face it. I know in my own life, I started doing this work after a lot of trauma in a very short period of time. And when you're in that dark space, it's very easy to look at the world as though everything's against you, like you're a victim. But it takes a lot of work to, and I say, make the decision to live your life differently. It doesn't just happen. And I know I got to a point where I couldn't stay there anymore. I was either going to end up ending my life if I did. I had to find another way. And everything that you're saying is so true, because when you do the work and you look within and you strive to heal all of those wounded parts, the other side is love. It is peace. It is calm. It's growth. And I think it comes down to making that choice. And I'm just not sure everyone is ready, willing, or even able to do that.
That's a beautiful point. Thank you. And personally, I can totally relate to that. I went through years of basically despair, of chronic anxiety, chronic depression, and real despair, hopelessness, not believing that anything could change. And I think you're absolutely right also, Joan, about not wanting to face our wounds. Absolutely. And often there's a lot of stigma and shame around it as well. And I had a lot of shame as a young man, and it's still a weakness for me, vulnerability to go into some of those old patterns. It's just I've got, I think, a lot better at managing them and catching them and welcoming them and allowing them and loving them too, which really kind of heals them. But what I speaking from my own experience, and then I can talk also about what I've seen, is that setting up. See, once I was giving myself a space of openness each day in meditation, of just sitting and being still, being outside the hectic round of my life, just being still, pretty quickly I realized I'm a mess. I need therapy. And the meditation became not just a kind of healing, but also a kind of check-in that I kind of couldn't deny. It really was creating a space where I could recognize how I was doing. Somehow there was enough of a sense of benevolence, at least at times, in the act of being still, that it became easier to acknowledge where I was at and to then begin a long path of healing. So somehow, I think the critical first step is, what is it that's going to allow us to say, you know what, I'm suffering, and one thing that I love about, I've trained in various different methodologies, a couple of them being Buddhist, and well, I'm not like a devout Buddhist or something, but I've benefited hugely from Buddhist views and methods. But they say there is suffering. That's the first truth. And just to hear that said, wow, an acknowledgement that human beings suffer. I found that so helpful because it took some of the stigma out of it. Mm-hmm. I always felt there was something wrong with me for being unhappy. If I was unhappy, it was some moral failure on my part. And actually, it was the path of practice, meaning basically meditation, and the associated awareness that can develop from it, that helped me recognize, no, there's nothing wrong with me. I'm just suffering. I'm not like fatally flawed. And, that's why I called my new book Original Love, because I think, even people who are not reared in a faith-based tradition, which I wasn't, and I'm not really a kind of a faith-based practitioner, but I think I still absorbed some idea of that Judeo-Christian doctrine of original sin, which that somehow I'm bad deep down, and whether or not it's kind of coming to us from culture, or whether it's from theological culture or just from general culture, I see a lot of people suffering from shame and worthlessness. Mm-hmm. And sometimes it's like it's subliminal, and they may not recognize it. They're just feeling lousy. But when they really look, they say, oh yeah, there's this constant low-level hum of unworthiness. Mm-hmm. And, to expose that, so that we can recognize it and just gently start to be with it and let it too receive some kind of love that allows it to soften, and then we can say, wow, I'm suffering, and that's not a moral failure. It's not something to be ashamed of. It's just it's actually the pathway to acknowledging that I'm a vulnerable being.
How much of that suffering that you're talking about, how much of that do you think is the result of the expectations we set up for our lives? Because I know that I spent a lot of time in misery because I had this whole story about how I thought things ought to be, the way they should be. I always found myself using that language, that this isn't how it's supposed to be. And what really helped me was learning to accept what is, not the way I think it should be. So how much does acceptance help in eliminating or reducing those expectations we set?
Oh, Joan, I totally agree with you. I think it's critical, because exactly those expectations that we demand of life and of ourselves, and sometimes even of those around us, they are a pathway to unhappiness, because even if, we manage to meet them, then we're just going to worry about failing to meet them in the future, or having new expectations that we must then meet. It's to drop the whole system of demands and expectations on ourselves and on life is a wonderful liberation, and it can bring a tremendous release from our suffering. Mm-hmm. Because I think, thanks for bringing that up. I think it totally ties in with the general sense of unworthiness that we can have. Because often, it's, look, hey, I haven't done this, I haven't done that, that didn't work. Look at me, I'm failing in this way, that way. And all of those are kind of the product of expectations.
when we expect all of these things the way our life is supposed to be, and then we keep replaying our past and all of the things that made us who we are today, it's really a vicious cycle. I mean, that's where I was stuck. I was stuck in longing for the past that I thought I wanted, and then having these expectations of how things are supposed to be. And I was really caught in that cycle.
Yes, exactly. There's something about like we're anticipating what the future needs to be, and what we expect it to be, and what we're kind of demanding it be, or feeling that it must be. And then at the same time, we're really dragged back by the past, where we may have regret and feel we didn't live up to stuff that we had hoped to. And then life can become this kind of tug of war between the past and our disappointments and sense of failure there, and the future and our anxiety about whether we'll measure up there. And those two pulls prevent us from being here. And when we can, I feel it's, I always feel like people think, I mean, I certainly did this myself, might think, oh, well, then I got to stop this pull of the past. I got to stop this pull of the future. But actually, no, I feel now we got to just acknowledge it and recognize it and allow it and accept it. Because when we accept our own patterns, and accept that this is how things are right now, then they soften. And instead of them, whereas if we're trying to say, hey, I've got to get rid of this tendency of mine to always be regretting the past or something, then it'll just get stronger and tighter. And instead of we just allow it, oh, wow, look what I'm doing. Let me love myself, even when I'm doing this painful thing of habitually regretting the past, or habitually anxious about the future. Let me accept that I am a being that's suffering from doing these things, and I'm not going to lambast myself and berate myself for doing that. I'm going to accept that I do that. I'm going to love myself, even though I'm doing these things. And then they can soften, because they're acknowledged and they're allowed to have their place. And it's much easier once they're acknowledged. Mm-hmm. I'm talking from, my own experience, as well as people who, who I've been blessed and privileged to work with, that then those tendencies can soften, and we start to find it easier to open up our hearts to this moment, including whatever suffering is in it, and including whatever beauty is in it. And then, I'm sure, you may find this as well, that there's times when our suffering becomes beautiful, when it's really allowed and loved. Then we start to, I think, tap into a larger sense of love, which is always here, a larger belonging that is kind of our birthright. And then from that place of a wider love, a more unconditional love, we're not required to be anything other than what we are. And that's very healing.
And that was one of the biggest lessons that I learned, that even in the worst experience of your life, there's a blessing. It may not be apparent at first, but if you take the time and you really look for it, it's there.
I totally agree. And it's amazing to me how many stories of great, practitioners and teachers and guides for humanity over the centuries. I don't know if I know of a single one that didn't really get the journey to awakening and to a broader love and a broader wisdom. It seems to always get started because of some deep suffering. Mm-hmm. Whether it's somebody with a chronic disease and illness, or whether it's somebody with catastrophic loss, somehow it seems like very often what makes us grow, and even in radical growth, are things that we wouldn't have wished on anybody, but they turn out to be, in some mysterious way, a great blessing in this life of ours.
And I couldn't agree with you more, because just looking at my own life, I was a different person before I experienced all of that trauma. I would not be doing what I do today without that trauma. it changed my life and it put me on a completely different path. So I agree with you. I think sometimes there are wonderful surprises that can come out of the darkness.
I couldn't agree more. And sometimes I think it's almost like I feel grateful for the suffering that I've gone through myself, even though I kind of might think I would prefer not to have. But actually, it keeps me alive and it keeps me open-hearted because I know what heartbreak is like. And I think the way I see it now is that heartbreak, of the many different ways it can show up, and the way we resist it often as well, and the traumas we may go through, I think that in a way they can all become gateways to an open heart. And an open heart is a whole heart, one that's not defended and that's not falling into shame so much, that's open to its own woundedness, open to the suffering of others, and open to serving the best we can as a kind of healing agent in this world.
Henry, if someone's listening to you right now and that person is really struggling, what would you say to help that person get started on this healing journey?
Yeah, I mean, I think the two things that are probably paramount would be, number one, reaching out for help. Is there somebody or some group, some organization that we can turn to for help, of other people who have been through something like what we're going through? Because, the thing is, there nearly always is. It's like so often when we're suffering, we think we're alone in it. And then as we reach out and explore, we'll find, oh, wow, there's a whole load of people who've been through the same thing, who are going through the same thing. And to connect is critical. And then secondly, I believe in the healing power of just being still with ourselves. It may be that at first we can only do 30 seconds, but just a little bit of really being still, still and quiet, and just letting experience for that tiny bit of time just be the way it is, and just noticing what is happening right now without needing to change anything. And maybe we can only do 30 seconds, and then maybe we can do a minute, and then we can do 2 minutes. But just that little bit of space when we're not doing anything, when we're letting our function of doing stop, and instead we're just hitting pause, and once again saying this may be a very small dose is all we can handle, but just to have a little tiny dose of not doing, just a micro dose each day, I think is intrinsically healing, because there's something about our very own being knows deep down how to heal. But, usually we're so caught up in things, we can't get to that level of just allowing our being to do its own healing. As we get so caught up in our lives and the activities and the things and the relationships and the agenda and to-do lists and all that, we can be so caught up in it that we don't have a chance to just be, even for a tiny little bit each day.
The book is Original Love, The 4 Ins on the Path of Awakening. Henry, if our listeners would like to learn more about you and your work, where can they go?
Yeah, I have a website, henryshukman.com, and I also have a new meditation app, the first of its kind, called The Way Meditation Path. It's in the App Store and Google Play, and it's unique because you don't have to make any decisions. Just from day one, it leads you on a path of meditation training. So you get taught day by day a little bit how to develop a habit for a lifetime of this quiet and stillness, a little bit every day.
And once again, that website is henryshukman.com. Henry, thank you so much for spending this time with us.
Joan, thank you very much for having me. I'm just delighted to get this time with you.
Thank you for joining us. I hope you found the show informative. At Change Your Attitude, Change Your Life, We believe that knowledge is power. Take what you've learned, apply it, and live your best life now. Remember that the information provided is the opinion of our guest and should never replace the advice of a professional who knows your personal situation. If you'd like more information, visit our website, CYACYL.com. That stands for Change Your Attitude, Change Your Life. While on the site, listen to past shows on demand, read our digital articles, and be sure to subscribe to our mailing list. Until next time, this is Joan Herman. Thanks for tuning in.